Welcome to European Journeys. This is the ninth stage of a series in which we explore some of the lives of the Walloons that changed the world. These were people who lived between the 16th and the 17th centuries. They came from what is today the north of France and the south of Belgium. At the time, these lands were parts of the United Netherlands. And they had adopted the Reformed faith, but came from lands where the Counter-Reformation would rage, when the Roman Catholic Church would gain back these lands through military means. Many of these Protestants had to flee and go to lands where they would be able to worship and live freely according to the Reformed faith. Well, the man we are going to talk about today came from the north of France, so that's where we are going to go. We are going to visit the city of Arras, that is about 50 kilometers south from Lille. Arras is a very ancient city. In fact, in Roman times it was called Atrebatum. So that means that this city exists since at least the Roman times. And at the time of the Reformation, Arras was part of the United Netherlands. As I said, it was the capital of a small county, part of the United Netherlands, that is the county of Artois. Now, in the city center today, there is a prominent building there that is house of the Musée des Beaux-Arts, the Museum of Fine Arts. Now, this is a building that is much older than the museum. The museum was installed there in the 19th century. But before that, in particular before the end of the 18th century, this building was in fact a monastery, an abbey. And it was seized by the revolutionaries in 1795, like many other church buildings and monasteries were seized by the revolutionaries. But so this building at the time of the Reformation was in fact a monastery. And contrary to common ideas about monasteries, many believe that these were places where people would go and retreat from the world. That was not always the case. I mean, these monks there who lived there in this monastery were right in the city center of Arras, and they provided education for the children there in Arras, in that monastery specifically. And it is in fact in that monastery that the man we are going to talk about had his first education. So who is the man we are going to talk about? Well, his name was Charles de l'Écluse. And he had also a Latin translation of his name, Carolus Clusius. And he was born in 1526. That is very early in the times of the Reformation. The Counter-Reformation was not yet full speed, in full swing in the United Netherlands. And Charles de l'Écluse was born in a family that had not yet adopted the Reformation, the Reformed faith. And so he went there in that abbey to receive his first education as a child. Very quickly, both his teachers and his family will recognize that this man has a lot of capabilities, was very clever. And as he grew a bit older in his childhood, he was sent to the Latin school in Ghent that would prepare a school that prepared the children to enter to university. And in fact, that's where he would go later, to the famous University of Leuven, near Brussels, to the Collegium Trilinguae, that was a very prestigious college, a college of three languages, that is, in English. And there he graduated at the age of 22 in 1548 in law. And it's probably during these years at the University of Leuven that Charles de l'Écluse was introduced to the Reformed faith and probably adopted the Reformed faith through his contact with a Flemish reformer, quite unknown, a man named Andreas Hyperius. But from then on, after his graduation, Charles de l'Écluse will continue his studies, and this time will go first to Marburg in Germany. That was a land that had adopted the Reformation already. And then to Wittenberg, the capital of the Lutheran Reformation, where, well, he did not meet Martin Luther. He could not meet Martin Luther because he died before his graduation in Leuven. But he met Martin Luther's successor, that is obviously Philip Melanchthon. Philip Melanchthon will exercise big influence in his life. Now, Charles de l'Écluse was very much interested in plants, flowers, and so Philip Melanchthon recommended him to continue his studies in medicine. At the time. That was pretty much the place where you would learn more about plants and flowers. It's to study medicine. Charles de l'Écluse will follow his counsel, but after a step first in Geneva. He will even go to Geneva, study there at the academy for 1 year in 1550, and then in 1551, following the counsel of Philippe Melanchthon, he will go to Montpellier in the south of France, which was then the most prestigious university when it came to medicine. It was the most famous university in Faculty of Medicine there in Montpellier. There he would begin to study. His studies will last long, about 9 years, because in fact, for a period of 5 years, he would not be able to study there in France. There was a war raging between France and the United Netherlands, and he was back home at the time. So he graduated in 1560 in Paris, 9 years later, when the borders were once again open. He was able to come back to France and finish his studies. The rest of his life, so we are now after the 1560s, for the rest of his life, Charles de l'Écluse will travel extensively and also serve in the courts, serve famous nobles there, including the emperor, the Austrian emperor Maximilian II. As I said, he traveled extensively, came back regularly to his homeland in the United Netherlands, served in Bruges and Mechelen, or Malines for the French speakers, there in what is today Belgium. He traveled several times to England as well, and even had a trip of 1.5 years between Spain and Portugal. But as I said, his service for the Austrian emperor led him to also spend a long time there in Austria and Hungary at the time. Now, all of that is very fine to know about him, but what is he known for? Well, in fact, he is known to be the father of horticulture. That is the study of plants and flowers. Now, that does not mean that before him no one studied plants and flowers. As I said, plants and flowers were studied for the sake of medicine, but he was the first to study plants and flowers not for utilitarian means. Before that, plants or flowers were studied principally for utilitarian means, whether for medicine or for food or whatever that could be useful for mankind. The approach of Charles de l'Écluse was different. Now, why was he the first one to study horticulture in such a way? Well, I believe that the main answer to that question is in the shift of worldview that Charles de l'Écluse had from Roman Catholicism to the Reformed worldview, the Reformed faith. Now, what was the difference? Well, in fact, the Roman Catholic faith, the Roman Catholic philosophy, drew heavily from Greek philosophy, and that was mainly through the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas or Albert the Great, these philosophers of 12th, 13th centuries, who had somehow reinterpreted Greek philosophy in Christian terms. They had taken Aristotle and brought Christian terms into that, which led the Roman Catholic Church to adopt a lot of Greek thinking, a lot of Greek thoughts that were not biblical. In particular, the Greeks understood that the world was inherently bad, and that's something that will be very present in the Roman Catholic philosophy in medieval times. For the Reformers, they didn't want to build the biblical worldview from Greek presuppositions. They started from Genesis 1. Genesis 1 tells that God created the world and that he called it good. He called his creation good. And for that reason, we ought to look at the creation with God's eyes, knowing that this is a good creation. Yes, it is tainted by sin, it is corrupted because of sin, but nevertheless it is not inherently bad, it is inherently good, because God said so. And that was the shift in worldview with which Charles de Lecluse will continue his studies. And the study of horticulture really starts from that understanding that God's creation is good, and so flowers and plants ought to be studied for what they are as creatures of God. His studies in horticulture, in fact, led him to make significant advances in the field. For example, he is the father of what are known today as botanical gardens. We find them in many places across Europe, in the main cities. He also advocated for the creation of a jardin d'acclimatation, that's a French word, for, in fact, just a garden that would be where plants coming from exotic lands would be able to survive also in European climate. He brought back from his numerous trips several flowers which are so common today. Flowers such as anemones or lilies, buttercups, tulips, all of these, he was the one who brought them to his homeland in the United Netherlands and in the northern parts of Europe. He is also believed to be the father of the cultivation of potatoes. Now, this is such a simple element for food. Imagine that these potatoes were not cultivated before his time. It was around his time that the cultivation of potatoes grew, and he is believed to be the father of the discovery of the cultivation of potatoes. So imagine a little bit how many poor people would be lifted out from poverty and from hunger somehow, thanks to this discovery of the cultivation of potatoes. I skipped many of the points about him and many other advances that he did, also in the study of mushrooms, for example. The list is very long. Why was he so prominent? Yes, he was clever, but he had also the right worldview. He had a biblical worldview, which allowed him to study God's creation and look at God's creation with God's eyes, starting from Scripture. I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next time for another stage of European Journeys.